What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be talking about some of the recent previews from Warhammer community about the GT2021 packet. I know I'm a little bit slow on the uptake on this one. Unfortunately, I'm just getting over my second vaccination shot, so still a little bit dizzy, but I think we can get through it. Anyway, just yesterday, the 25th of May, Warhammer community put out some previews about new secondary objectives in the GT2021 packet. Earlier this week, I released a video talking about the GT2021 announcement and wish listing some changes that we could see in the new packet. And I think what's interesting is, some of the stuff that we talked about in that video, it looks like is definitely going to be changing in the new packet, which is good to see. We had a lot of really good discussion in the comment section of that video as well, too. A lot of people brought up some really good points that I think I overlooked, and it looks to me like a lot of the things that people are bringing up, the issues that they are having, especially with secondary objectives in the 2020 packet, are being addressed in this 2021 package. So the way the article is formulated is that basically they went and interviewed some of the play testers, namely Mike Brandt, Nick Nadavati, and Stephen Box from Vanguard Tactics. Good to see those guys getting some publicity on the Warhammer community page. But Mike Brandt in particular talks about some changes to the Investigate Sites secondary. That is one specifically that we talked about in the previous video. I mentioned that it was sort of obnoxious that you could contest Investigate Sites because that made it such an easily contestable secondary objective that no one really ever took it unless you had a ridiculously favorable layout of the board, and that's something they're reworking. So instead of being able to contest it at the start of the turn, you can perform the action as long as the unit is within 6 inches of the center, regardless of where enemy models are, but you only score the points if at the end of your turn, there are no enemy models there. So if your opponent's contesting it, they have to do it with a really hardy unit, because if they do it with anything small, you can just kill them and then go on. And I think that really introduces an interesting back and forth to the secondary, because your opponent is incentivized to try to stop it. And also, if you are playing it in a mission where there's a central objective, it's going to be a little bit less good because your opponent's going to be sending models, hardy, resilient models to that center of the table anyway. So there's less of a chance that you're going to be able to kill them, but your opponent can't really feed you inconsequential chaff units, in order to contest that secondary objective. That sounds good. I think this is actually a secondary that especially people are going to take, especially, I think if they have they have those cheap utility units that they can send into the middle to complete that secondary, and B, there's no center objective, because at that point, your opponent is disincentivized from contesting that center unless there's like a really favorable piece of terrain or something for them. So they're probably totally unlikely to go into the middle. If there's nothing in the middle for them to control, and all they're doing is, diverting some of your attacks to kill their unit that's contesting the middle, they're not even going to try. So it's like free points. I mean, I think that change is great. I think that makes this a really interesting counterpoint to some of the other Shadow Operations secondaries. They also changed it to Investigate Signal. It's kind of weird to me that they're changing the name of the secondaries when they change their mechanical identity. We understand it's just an update. Like, no one's going to get confused that Investigate Sites works differently in 2021 from what it did in 2020. And especially once we talk about some of the other naming conventions in here, they're a little bit funky, but it's okay. Another objective that's changed its name that Nick Nanavati is talking about in his portion of the article is No Prisoners! No prisoners! Which is replacing Thin Their Ranks. Now, something that a lot of people brought up in the comment section of the last video, and something that was very appropriate, and I totally glossed right over, is that it is weird that Thin Their Ranks scores off model count and extra for vehicles. We already have Bring It Down to punish vehicle lists. Why do we also have Thin Their Ranks? And that allows you in a lot of instances to double dip, especially in a list that's focused on dedicated transports plus infantry. And that can be kind of a toxic interaction, especially for, some lists that are bringing a bunch of garbage infantry backed up by vehicles, and they just get punished twice. And it looks like that's going to be changing. Now, another thing that a lot of people have asked for throughout the entire course of GT 2020 is, please, GW, give us a Gangbusters equivalent, from old school ITC, where you get points for killing multi-wound models. And that's what they're doing here. So now, no prisoners counts the wounds characteristic of destroyed models that aren't monsters, vehicles, or characters. So it doesn't stack with any of the other secondaries, assuming those stay the same. So Bring It Down, Assassinate, none of those will stack with this No Prisoners. But if you're playing against Death Guard with a bunch of Terminators, or Custodes with a bunch of high model count models, you are going to be able to actually score a reasonable number of points on the secondary, which I think is phenomenal. I think that's great. Things like Space Marines and Custodes, one of their biggest strengths is that they tend to be very difficult to score secondaries against, and that's something that this change could potentially fix a little bit. They also talked about a new version of Deploy Scramblers, which I think has the silliest name. Retrieve Octarius data. Okay, I really liked Deploy Scramblers because, I don't know, Scramblers is a funny word. And, but now we're retrieving Octarius data. Okay, again, you could just keep these the same name, but you know what, it's okay. And this basically talks about a change to Deploy Scramblers where you completed it in table quarters rather than the 3 steps of the game, so your deployment zone, center of the table, middle enemy deployment zone. That sounds way easier to score. It also sounds like it scores progressively, not end game, so it's not all or nothing. This actually seems like a really, really powerful upgrade to Deploy Scramblers, which is interesting because it was already one of the most played secondaries in GT 2020, if you had the units that were able to do it. And this one just seems like it's going to be a lot easier. So I don't know. We'll see how that pans out. It is certainly an interesting change, but one thing it does do is removes the interesting interaction between the Shadow Op secondaries where, like, the position of objectives, where your opponent's army is going to be placed, and the size of their deployment zone determines whether you want to take Deploy Scramblers or you want to take something like Raise the Banners high. And it sounds like this is just going to be almost strictly better than the other Shadow Op secondaries. Now, one thing we don't know is how many points it scores. It may be like an end game scoring that checks the number of objectives that you've completed. Consider like Titan Slayer, right? It doesn't score an even number of points for the number of times you've completed the objective. If that's the case, it could score similarly to Deploy Scramblers. You know, if they have all 4 table quarters be worth 10 points, and if you only get 3, it's maybe worth 7, and if you only get 2, it's maybe worth 3 or something like that. So really the final verdict is going to come down to exactly how that scoring works precisely. But there is a universe, I think, where this is just worth 3 points for every table quarter you completed in, so it's actually worth a little bit more if you complete those 4 actions rather than 3, then Deploy Scramblers. Now, the interesting thing is also going to be whether or not you can complete the action multiple times in a turn, because doing 4 actions over the course of the game is actually kind of legitimately hard, because, you know, Deploy Scramblers you could have done by turn 3 and then, you know, have it be over, but in this one, having to complete that 4th action on Battle Round 4 is actually going to be a little tough. I imagine that this is just going to be an upgrade to Deploy Scramblers, so that sounds good to me. I don't know, I'm into it. Lastly, we have Steven Box here with a little bit of a write-up. Now, he doesn't mention any particular secondaries specifically, but he does say that a lot of the secondary objectives have changed so that they're less all or nothing and more granular. So imagine like Psychic Ritual, where you have to complete it 3 times to get all your points. More granular would mean that every completed Psychic Ritual would be, would award you X number of points. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that the Psychic Ritual has changed, because it's not what this article is saying at all. But I am excited to see objectives that are a little bit easier to score overall. Because that does make the game more interesting. You know, even if your opponent is able to stop a lot of your secondary objective scoring, at least you're not boned for, you know, not getting it entirely. Steven also mentions that there are changes to bring it down. Now, I don't know if this is talking about the January FAQ changes to bring it down that we already have, or if we are actually seeing some changes to bring it down. I hope that we are. Like we talked about in the previous video, I hope the cutoff for bring it down goes to score 2 points on it instead of 1 goes to 10 wounds, because a lot of these dedicated transport lists are really getting away with murder of being able to take a bunch of vehicles and not actually give up any points on bring it down. But we'll just have to wait and see. They talk about armies made up of Tyranid monsters, Astromilitarum tanks, or Orc vehicles becoming more viable. I'll take your word for it, Steven. And again, at the article, they just reinforced that it is available for pre-order on Saturday. Anyway, just wanted to make a quick video talking about my thoughts on these changes, and I am super hyped for GT 2021. I think post-January FAQ, GT 2020 is a really solid mission pack. You know, frankly, I'm impressed that GW, you know, has been able to assemble something like this. Now, obviously, it's not perfect, and there's a long way to go to improve it, and it certainly sounds like that's the direction they're going to be going in. You know, as much as I can riff on their weird naming conventions and stuff like that, I think it is legitimately impressive that they are able to make these changes to their tournament pack and really update it based on community feedback and based on the stats that they've been seeing. And I'm excited to see the new version. So bring it on. Let's play some GT 2021. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.